In the quiet suburbs of Louisiana, college sweethearts, Mitch and Kayla lived the quintessential American dream. Good careers, a white picket fence, and children who brought joy to their idyllic life. But life as they knew it was about to change. An ordinary day would soon spiral into an extraordinary encounter, shattering their perfect world. A strange event would set Mitch on a path of discovery so disturbing that nothing could have prepared him for it. And it all began with something as simple as a lamp. Buckle up, this story has such a twist that it will leave you questioning the very fabric of reality you live in. In 2004, Mitch was in his senior year at a Louisiana university. He was the captain of the football team and was well-liked and respected. Despite having an intense schedule, Mitch was able to balance his athletic commitments with his academic responsibilities. Among his classmates was Kayla, who was also a senior at the time. Brilliant in her own regard, there was no doubt she would capture the attention of someone like Mitch. But Mitch had long harbored feelings for Kayla and finally decided to ask her out. Although she initially turned him down a few times to focus on her academics, Mitch's persistence paid off, and she eventually agreed. Once they started dating, their connection was immediate and undeniable. Eventually, this blossomed into a deep love that saw them through graduation and married life. By 2006, Mitch and Kayla had purchased their dream home, a charming house in a peaceful suburb. Their life together was a perfect blend of ambition and affection. Both excelled in their careers. Mitch landed a job in finance, and Kayla found success as a marketing executive. Weekends were sacred, reserved for family outings, cozy game nights, and romantic dates that kept their marriage strong. In 2007, Kayla gave birth to their daughter, and 2 years later, a son. Their family was complete, and Mitch embraced fatherhood with enthusiasm. Every morning, he would sneak into his children's bedrooms and playfully wake them up with gentle spooks. The house was always filled with laughter, and Mitch's persistence in pursuing Kayla, well, that really paid off. Despite the demands of parenting, Mitch and Kayla made it a point to nurture their relationship. They often hired babysitters to enjoy romantic dinners and quiet evenings together. The two were living the American dream, a loving marriage, a beautiful home, and a happy family. In 2009, Mitch was alone in the house. It was a typical Sunday afternoon, and he was lounging on the couch, watching a football game. The house was quiet, and he was alone. Kayla had taken the kids to visit her parents, and so Mitch took the opportunity to have a real lazy day for himself. It was around 4 p.m., and the late afternoon sun was sort of bathing the entire house, something Mitch had always appreciated. But this time, the sunlight was hitting a spot in the corner of the living room. In that spot, a simple red lamp was standing. It was an unassuming piece of furniture that he and Kayla had picked up at Target. This item took Mitch's attention, but he didn't pay too much mind to it. As his eyes flicked from the game to the room, something unusual started to happen. The lamp's base began to appear blurry, as if he was looking through the lens of a camera that was out of focus. However, everything else around the lamp remained sharp and clear. Mitch rubbed his eyes, thinking it was a trick of the light, or perhaps his own tiredness playing tricks on him. But no matter how much he blinked or squinted, the lamp refused to come into focus. Mitch tried to ignore this for a while, thinking it was going to go away, but it persisted in his periphery, and eventually his curiosity got the better of him. Mitch got up and walked over to the lamp. He stared at it intently, even touched it, but nothing changed. The lamp remained stubbornly blurry. He shook his head and dismissed it as a strange optical illusion and returned to the couch. He tried to focus on the game, but his eyes kept drifting back to the corner of the room. The lamp's blurriness nagged at him. It was a small but growing seed of unease. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, the lamp began to move. With nobody touching it, the blurry lamp had now turned upside down. Mitch thought it was impossible, but he knew there was obviously something wrong with him. He could very well be having a stroke or some medical emergency, but for some reason, he couldn't get himself to call the doctor. Mitch eventually stopped watching the game and turned his entire focus on the blurry lamp, watching it closely and intently, like he was in some sort of trance. At some point during that evening, Kayla and the kids returned home, snapping Mitch out of his trance. He returned to normal and kissed his wife on the cheek and even played around with the children. Initially, he thought of telling Kayla about the situation, but Mitch feared she would go into a state of panic, and so he decided to keep it to himself. He watched Kayla closely, waiting to see if she would react to the lamp. She moved around the room, completely unaffected, her expression unchanged. It was then Mitch realized he was the only one who could see the strange distortion. The evening unfolded as usual, with dinner, stories, and finally putting the kids to bed. Yet, Mitch couldn't shake the image of the blurry lamp from his mind. It lingered and made him uneasy. As the night got deeper, Mitch and Kayla went to bed. Kayla quickly drifted off to sleep. However, Mitch lay staring at the ceiling. His mind was still racing. He couldn't stop thinking about the lamp. Restless and anxious, Mitch glanced at Kayla, peacefully asleep beside him. So he quietly slipped out of bed and crept downstairs. The house was in complete darkness, but Mintic didn't bother turning on the lights or the television. Instead, he sat silently on the couch, his eyes fixated on the lamp. In the morning, Kayla got up and found Mitch downstairs, sitting on the couch. It was a workday, so it was unusual to see him sitting idly. Concerned, Kayla approached him, tapping him on the shoulder. "Mitch, what are you doing?" she asked. Mitch quickly broke from his trance. "I wasn't feeling well and couldn't sleep," he replied. "I decided to come downstairs. I think I'll call in sick today." Kayla frowned. Mitch never took a day off from work. Something was definitely wrong, but Mitch brushed off her concern with a forced smile. "I'll be fine," he assured her. Reluctantly, Kayla went about her morning routine, preparing the kids for school and getting ready for work. She shot worried glances at Mitch, but he remained on the couch, his eyes completely fixated on the lamp. Eventually, Kayla finished work and picked up the kids from school. Her concern for Mitch gnawed at her as she drove home as quickly as she could. Opening the door, she was met with a disturbing sight. Mitch was still sitting on the couch, his eyes fixed on the lamp. He hadn't moved an inch since the morning she left him. "Mitch!" she called, her voice trembling with worry. There was no response. Mitch remained completely still, his gaze locked on the unassuming lamp. Kayla's urgency grew as she rushed to his side, shaking him gently. "Mitch!" she repeated, louder this time. But again, there was no response. Kayla began to panic. She quickly ushered the kids upstairs, telling them to stay put. Grabbing the phone, she frantically dialed the doctor, her hands shaking. Meanwhile, Mitch was lost in his own world. He couldn't hear Kayla anymore. Every sound had faded into the background. His entire focus was on the lamp, which began to change for a second time. The lamp started to grow, its form distorting and expanding abnormally. It swelled larger and larger until it consumed the entire space of the living room. Mitch's vision was filled with the grotesque sight of the expanding lamp, which seemed to engulf him completely. And that was when Mitch began to feel a sharp, blinding pain in his head. He closed his eyes against the searing pain, but soon his ears began to ring. The ringing grew louder and louder until it abruptly stopped. In its place, Mitch could hear the sounds of people screaming around him. He opened his eyes to a startling sight. A sea of people, all staring at him as he lay on the ground. It was broad daylight, and Mitch wasn't in his house anymore. Panic and confusion surged through him. He struggled to his feet and grabbed the nearest person. "Where are my wife and kids?" he demanded. But the person only looked at him with concern. Desperation set in as Mitch began to yell for Kayla, pushing his way through the crowd of college kids. Suddenly, a police officer came running toward him. Fear gripped Mitch, and he braced himself for impact. But instead of tackling him, the officer gently lifted him up and carried him away from the chaos. The officer hurried to a police car, placing Mitch in the back seat. He kept shouting for Kayla and his kids, while the pain in his head throbbed relentlessly. The officer climbed into the driver's seat and sped off with urgency. "Sit back and try not to move too much," he instructed. Eventually, they reached the emergency room. A doctor met them and began examining Mitch's head injury. Still dazed and confused, Mitch looked up at the doctor and asked, "Where are my wife and kids?" Almost on the brink of tears. The doctor placed a hand on Mitch's shoulder and began to explain the situation. "You were tackled in a football game, Mitch. You hit your head hard on the ground and were unconscious for about a minute. We're treating you for a concussion." And then it dawned on Mitch. None of those 10 years that he described had ever truly happened. The entire timeline he remembered, Kayla, the 2 kids, the house with the white picket fence, none of it was real. It was all merely a figment of his imagination, constructed by his brain in a matter of minutes. In an instant, the reality he had known was shattered, leaving him to grapple with the profound loss of a family and life that were never truly his. In the aftermath of this all, Mitch fell into a deep depression, forced to grieve the loss of his imaginary family that had never actually existed. The anguish was all too real, even if the memories were not. Years passed, and even after graduating from university, the pain of losing his loved ones lingered, a shadow that refused to fade. Now in his late 30s, Mitch was still haunted by his imagined life. Occasionally, he would catch a fleeting vision of his 5-year-old son darting around the corner of his home, forever frozen in time. The boy's laughter echoed in his mind, a reminder of the family he had loved and lost, even if only in a dream.